I'm Helen Norbury, and this is Becoming Unapologetically Me, the show all about authentic self-expression with expert guests from the fields of health, leadership, and mindset. This show is here to show you that you don't need to conform to the expectations that friends, family, and society have of you, and actually what we can unearth when we find the courage to become the unapologetic version of who we are. Grab a cup of coffee and get your notepad out for this week's episode. Hello, and welcome back to Becoming Unapologetically Me. Today, I wanted to record a session with no guests this time, just to talk about something that I'm seeing with every single person that I speak to at the moment. I feel we're in this dichotomy where we've made the world really small through the technology and the connections that we're able to have, but yet driven so much distance between ourselves. So I remember when I was a child, my dad lived first in Saudi Arabia and then later in Africa. And I could never speak to him because it was too expensive on the phone and the line was never a good connection. So we wrote letters to each other. And in fact, when I was very small, my dad used to write bedtime stories for me that my mum would read. And these letters were, in my mind, a really unsatisfactory form of communication because I would write to my dad one Sunday, take about a week for the airmail letter card to arrive with him. He would read it, reply, and then a week after he'd replied, I'd get the response. So answers to any questions that you'd asked in the first letter maybe took 3 weeks to get a response to. And it felt really unsatisfactory. When I went to university, I got email for the first time, and my dad also had email, and we started to Skype each other. And that was so much better. I could see him, I could talk to him in real time, and it really changed our relationship because our communication was, as communication should be, fairly instantaneous and backwards and forwards, and it was lovely. Roll forwards to the pandemic, and prior to that, I was going to work in an office every single day, interacting with people in real life, around the water cooler, having lunch together, those sorts of things. Obviously, the pandemic came, that all changed, and suddenly life became online, and Zoom became an integral part of all of our lives. And that was so convenient. But yet with that convenience, we've kind of got stuck in the convenience, I believe, and forgotten all of the other parts of why we actually interacted in real life with people. So the challenge that I see for myself and for every single person that I speak to is that convenience of working online and being able to work with people around the world really, really easily. I was interviewing a guest just last week, I think it was. We recorded the interview from someone from the west coast of the USA. That wouldn't be possible if we didn't have these online connections. However, when that becomes all that we have, then there's something that's missing in life. And so that's really what I want to talk about today, is why we still need each other in an offline capacity. So it always comes back to me when I sit with a friend and maybe we're having coffee or chatting away, and it just hits you that this now feels rare to be able to have that, but at the same time, way too important to lose. So today, I really want to talk about the beauty, the necessity, and the raw humanity of real life connection and what we lose when we live our lives almost entirely online. I remember a coach saying to me many, many years ago, you choose your hard. And actually, there's so many things in life that are hard. And maybe making the effort to go into an office every day feels really hard. It would feel much easier to be at home. But actually, in being at home, the hard element of that is that you disconnect from people in real and authentic terms. And so choosing your hard needs to kind of be a way up and a balance of the different options for you. And of course, it's going to be different for everyone in terms of which hard you want to choose, how much of which hard you want to choose. But I think asking the question of, if I've chosen the hard that is staying at home and working online and not seeing people on a daily basis outside of your family, is that enough? Yes, you can see all the notifications pinging through on your social media. You can see your emails coming in on a seemingly unstopping basis. But how easy is it to feel lonely within that crowd of notifications? And this is what we need to think about when we're choosing our hard. There was a study conducted by Harvard which talked about what makes people happy. And in fact, it isn't success or money. It's actually the close in-person relationships. And that's based on 85 years of data. So they tracked hundreds and hundreds of men and their families. And one of their most powerful takeaways was that it was close relationships, more than money or fame, that's what keeps people happy throughout their lives. And also, to go a bit deeper on that, it's not just any relationship, but really meaningful in-person ones that include regular connection and physical presence. So we can have our thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of followers online. But actually, it's those few people that we sit down with over a coffee or hug after a hard day. Those are the people who actually sustain us through life. There's also there's a nurse called Bronnie Ware who worked an awful lot with people in palliative care. And she worked with patients in the last 3 weeks to 12 weeks of their life. And had a lot of conversations with them, got to know them an awful lot. And in most cases, they were people who'd gone home to die. So she was spending really special times with them in their home, but in the last few weeks of their lives. And she asked them a lot of questions, and she got to understand a lot about what is it when you're faced with your own mortality, what is it that becomes important? And whilst they were going through the normal Kubler-Ross model of grief and change that we are maybe very familiar with, and experiencing those emotions like denial, fear, anger, remorse, eventually coming to a place of acceptance, she found that everyone found their peace before they finally departed. But she asked them, and from all the people that she worked with, she summarized a top 5 list of regrets that people had on their deathbed. And I thought they were really interesting and really relevant to the message of this podcast, in fact. So I wanted to share those. So the first was that I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. And this was the most common by far. And seeing how dreams have gone unfulfilled. And of course, we're going to keep some of the dreams in our back pocket and in our dream factory. But when you know that you haven't honored a huge portion, maybe half of your dreams, and you die knowing that that was due to the choices that you made or didn't make, that is a massive regret of people on their deathbeds. The next one was, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. So she said that this came from literally every male patient that she nursed. So they'd missed their children growing up. They'd missed the companionship with their partner. And whilst women also spoke of this regret, many were from an older generation where the females in the relationship had not been breadwinners. But I definitely see this as being something that in the next generation or so is going to become equally important for women as men, given that there's many more women who are now breadwinners compared to historically. There's a lot to be said about creating the life that you want to live and having an income to support that, but also creating some simplicity so that you are able to create a life that doesn't cost so much, to be able to afford to get that balance more equally. And what other opportunities may open up as you free up space from not working. I'm not even going to say the 9 to 5 because it's beyond the 9 to 5. The third regret that people shared was, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. So many people experience suppressing their feelings in order to keep peace with other people. And as a result, settling for mediocrity in their own lives and never becoming who they were capable of becoming. So obviously, that's one message through this podcast that we try to discuss and address. And in many cases, people had developed illnesses which related to the bitterness and the resentment that they carried from living a life in that way. So understanding that we can never control the reactions of other people, and some people may not respond well to when we're speaking honestly. And maybe that's the right thing, because maybe that helps to elevate that relationship or release the relationship from your life. But either way, you're going to win. So the fourth regret, particularly relevant to this conversation, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. So often people wouldn't realize or appreciate maybe the full benefits of their old friends until their dying weeks. And then it became difficult to track them down or reconnect. And many were so caught up in their own lives that they'd let their friendships slip by over the years. And lots of deep regrets about not giving friendships the time and effort that they deserved. And that can be really common with life. You know, life can take over in so many ways, particularly when you're raising children, you're racing around, doing all of the things that is involved with being a parent. And those friendships can slip. But it's actually really important to keep those connections. Maybe not all of the people all of the time. Maybe there's a scale whereby some people you see really regularly, some less regularly. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've got all these amazing ways of keeping in touch with people. And maybe it's less frequent to see people in person, but at least we're keeping connected in the meantime, such that it's easier to reconnect in person. But when it comes down to it, that's all there is. Love and relationships, that's all that remains in the final weeks. And the final regret that people had, and I'm going to say that this is linked to the previous one, is that I wish that I had let myself be happier. When you realize that happiness is a choice, that's so freeing, so empowering. So many people can stay stuck in old patterns and habits and the comfort of familiarity. And I think that's where we've got to with working online and connecting with people online, that it's comfortable, it's easy, but actually it's not choosing happiness and connection and contentment at a really soul level. This conversation that we shared about these regrets with people really reminded me of my mum and her final months of life. So she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in around about March of 2008. And having seen my dad die literally a year earlier to that, we knew what the prognosis was going to be for her. She knew she had about 6 months to live. Even though the doctors don't specifically say that, we knew that that was how it was going to be. So my brother started looking after my mum on a fairly permanent basis. And I used to go back several times a week to see her, and commuting an awful long distance to do that. But I wanted to spend as much time with her as I possibly could within those 6 months. So every single time I arrived home to see her, there she was at the kitchen table with a group of her friends from throughout her life, basically, all there. And they were chatting and laughing, reminiscing about old times. And honestly, I think she had the best time in those 6 months. My mum was quite insular at times. She didn't necessarily see people throughout her life. And there were times when she was quite isolated. But these 6 months, she brought all of the people who were special to her and had been special to her throughout her life. She brought them all close, and she really connected and found that happiness again with her friends, and laughed and laughed and laughed. And that is my abounding memory from the time when she was sick and before she died, was her laughing and surrounded by all the people that she loved and enjoyed spending time with. And whilst I was really happy that she was doing that, there was a part of me that went, why didn't you do that for the rest of your life? And maybe you'd have been this happy for the whole of your life. I don't know. But it was an amazing choice that she made to connect with everybody. And I think that is such an important message here, that life is a choice. It's your life. So choose it really consciously, choose it wisely, choose it honestly, and choose the version that makes you the happiest, because you have all of those options. And if it feels like there aren't options, just look around again, because maybe the blinkers are on. You always have a choice. One of my favorite sayings, you're not a pint of Guinness, you don't have to settle. And so maybe we've stayed in the online world too long, and it's just easy to keep doing the same thing, and we're not noticing the detriment that it has to us. And this made me think that how many people have stayed longer than they should in a certain job, in a certain relationship, in a friendship, just because it feels the easier option. And coming back to that choose your hard point, you're not seeing the impact that that's having on you by making that choice. And actually to take a moment and to see the bigger picture of the impact. I think this is so important. So another really important point, I read an article not so long ago about how hybrid working is considered better than purely remote working, because the people who purely remote work are often overlooked for promotion. Yes, they're at home, they're doing their jobs, they're ticking along, doing what they're expected to do, but they're not seen. And as a result, they get missed in so many aspects of the career and career progression. And then I read an article, or the outcome of a study from the University of Chicago, which talked about how trust is built face to face. I started to put these two things together, and I was like, maybe this is it, that by entirely remote working, maybe the element of trust in a person starts to diminish when you're emailing, you're on Teams, you're whatever other connection mechanisms you have within your organization. But actually, what this University of Chicago study found is that people are significantly more likely to trust someone that they've engaged with on a face-to-face basis. And that creation of psychological safety, which is so important in organizations in order to get the most in terms of productivity, in terms of quality, creativity. You will only get the best from people when there is psychological safety. And it's so much harder to achieve online. So again, it made me think, all of those big conversations, whether they're job interviews, their apologies, their big decisions, so much more real, more human, more authentic when they happen in person. I always think it's so much easier to deliver and receive difficult news face to face. I remember I was at boarding school, and one of my big fears of being at boarding school was that one of my pets would die, and I would just get a phone call from my mum to tell me that this pet had died, and I would have to deal with it on my own at boarding school. And I shared this fear with her, and she said to me, "Don't worry, if anything like that ever happens, I will drive up to school and I will see you and we will have a conversation. I'll tell you face to face. This will never be a phone call to let you know." And that gave me great reassurance to know that not only was I going to be delivered, or I could potentially, it never happened, but I could potentially be delivered a difficult message. But with that would come the ability for my mum to give me a hug or just to make me feel okay. I wouldn't be alone in that. And I think now, how many people receive difficult news online because it's more convenient, or we haven't created the time to share it in the best way for everybody. So that was quite an important consideration for me, I think. And related to that, touch really matters. And again, I think we all really noticed this during the pandemic, particularly people who don't have other people that they were living with, who are literally alone, that touch really matters. And the release of oxytocin lowers your stress levels. And it's just such a powerful way to help deliver messages and for our nervous system. So whether it's a hand on the shoulder, a pat on the back, a hug, any of these, they release oxytocin in our body, which lowers cortisol and literally calms the nervous system. So that we don't get that from a heart emoji or a like on a social media post. In fact, I'd go so far as to say we get the complete opposite from our nervous system's perspective. There's so many people who are waiting for the right number of hearts, likes, comments, etc. on social media posts that actually becomes a source of stress. So when did you last get a text message or a social media comment that made you feel truly seen in the same way that a hug or a shared laugh does? I'm going to hazard a guess that it probably hasn't happened. Or if it has, they're few and far between compared to the hugs and those physical connections. I also remember taking the love language test in the middle or sort of towards the end of lockdowns. Bear in mind, I'm a single parent. So whilst I was living with my two children, there were no other adults in my home. And when I took that test, I think it was the thing that I missed most because my love language came out very, very strongly in the physical touch aspect. And I was like, that's strange. That's not normally what I would have expected it to come out as. And actually, back in a more normal life, that whilst it's important, is definitely not sort of right up at the top of my love languages. Much more for spending quality time and deep conversations with people. And when I was back in my normal state, that rebalanced in the way that I kind of expected it to come out. But in that moment where I was really missing physical touch, it was kind of like the only thing I could think about. And so really identifying that the cost of not having these things, what that can do to you, the same as any personal connection. Yes, you're still talking to people. I have loads of conversations with people all day, every day, pretty much, but online. And actually, you can still feel disconnected, even though you're talking to people all day, every day, if you're not actually creating those opportunities for in-person, real life connection. And a heart emoji just doesn't cut it. So another thing that I was kind of reflecting on with this is I think the digital world, and kind of what I've just said around this volume of meetings that I can have in a week, digital focuses a lot on quantity. So how many meetings we're having, how many likes we're getting, how many comments we're getting on our social media, how many downloads on our podcasts. Whereas real life focuses on quality. We don't need 5,000 people to validate or to connect with us on a day-to-day basis. Actually, that would be really overwhelming. Actually, we probably only need 2, 3, 6, 10 really close friends. And actually, there's been some studies that say we can't really cope as humans with more than about 30 really good connections. So our real life focuses so much more on quality and the depth of the conversations that we're having. Is someone looking in your eyes? Can you feel how they're kind of responding to you in the moment? And this got me thinking about history and going back in time. And the kids were learning not so long ago about the suffragette movement. And so I was reflecting on that and thinking, imagine if that was today and it was all conducted online. How would it look different? And I think some of these examples, like the suffragette movement, are really powerful examples of the power of real life connection, because I don't believe that it would happen with the same degree of conviction if it was all conducted online and we were having WhatsApp chats about it. We were all in a WhatsApp group, and then there were some sort of social media posts about, yay, let's all do this. I don't believe that there would be anything like the depth of conviction to the cause as there was back then. It wasn't a hashtag. It wasn't a viral video. It was thousands and thousands of women showing up in person again and again. They were marching, organizing, risking everything just to be heard. So it's started from 1913, and more than 5,000 women gathered in Washington in the USA for the Women's Suffrage Parade. It wasn't a polite protest. They were heckled, they were shoved, they were assaulted just for walking together in public and demanding a voice. That bravery, it's contagious when you're there in person, when you're side by side, and you feel that fire jump from the person next to you, to the person on the other side. And behind those marches were countless small gatherings in living rooms, tea shops, church halls, where strategy and sisterhood, side by side, arm in arm, they were built one conversation at a time. No followers, no likes, no YouTube videos, no social media posts, nothing like that. And women like Emmeline Pankhurst, they were arrested, they went on hunger strikes, they were force-fed in prison. That commitment, that courage, it doesn't come from scrolling through social media. It doesn't even come from a Zoom call. It comes from connection, from looking someone in the eye and saying, we're in this together. We're fighting this cause together. And it really reminds me that real change, the kind that shifts laws and hearts, starts in a room, starts around a table, starts with connection in real life. So I think the thing that we're missing, and the conversations that I'm having with person after person, day after day, is those intangibles of being together. The laughter that you can feel, the body language, the silence together, even real-time feedback. And one thing that really concerns me is how mental health is impacted by being alone. There's so much talk already about concerns for the elderly who are really struggling with loneliness. And whilst I'm also very concerned about that, in a way, I'm even more concerned about what that's going to look like in 25, 50 years' time as online connection increases and real life in-person connection decreases. What does that mean for people by the time they get to their later years? We're not built to go it alone. Our brains, our hearts, we're wired for connection. Not the connection that happens in a group chat or a double tap like. I mean, real eye contact, laugh together, sit in silence kind of connection. And so study after study has shown that people who regularly engage in face-to-face social interaction, they're happier, they're less anxious, they're even physically healthier. And we've talked about the Harvard study of adult development, following people for over 80 years and finding that the biggest predictor of happiness and longevity isn't genetics or success or even exercise. It's close in-person relationships. So what that means is that dinner with a friend might be just as important for your health as going for a run. And that's from someone who does a lot of exercise. But real life connection helps to lower our cortisol, which is our stress hormone. It boosts oxytocin, the bonding chemical, or sometimes called the love chemical, that literally calms your nervous system. And all it takes is a simple hug, a shared laugh, someone reaching across the table and giving your hand a squeeze. Those moments are actual medicine for your body. Digital connection just doesn't hit the same way. So we're lonelier than ever as we scroll through highlight reels, seemingly more connected than ever, and somehow more isolated than ever. Because connection without presence is just like junk food for the soul, really. Fills you up enough for you not to feel hungry in the moment, but without realizing how hungry you actually really are. You haven't taken a moment to see, actually, this junk food is not hitting the spot. So maybe if you're feeling off, if you're anxious, tired, disconnected, maybe it's not just burnout. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's that cycling through the news all the time or too much screen time. Maybe you just need a friend in real life, a coffee, a walk, a conversation. It all just shifts something deep inside. We don't need to go viral. We just need to be seen, heard, and understood. That's all it takes. I remember just not so long ago having a conversation with someone that I work with. We were talking about some changes that were coming and different opportunities that were on the horizon. And this person said to me, but you're your best because you're who you are. And you've got lots of different skills and you're able to bring all of those into who you are within your business and within your career. And I don't want to put you in one box and have you do one thing because I won't get the best from you because you're amazing because you do all of the things. And in that moment, I felt so seen, heard, and appreciated for who I am. And no, it's not conventional. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's different, but it's me. And this person seeing me meant so much that he kind of reaffirmed my faith in that proper real life connection. And you're not just a number. You're not just a kind of a number on your P&L or your balance sheet. You're actually appreciated and valued as a human, and as a human who works in the best way for you. And so that was a really special moment. So my offer to you from today is to hopefully take some practical tips away from today. Where is your online life actually not serving you in exactly the way that you would like it to? And what could you do to deepen that connection in real life with people? Maybe it's a phone call instead of a text or a WhatsApp message. Maybe you could host a dinner or a games night, and even go to the next step and have a Jeffersonian style dinner where there's one conversation going on around the table rather than the half a dozen that is normal. So you're all really deeply connected with each other and sharing vulnerably. Have tech-free walks with your friends. You don't need your phone for an hour or two going for a walk with a friend, but just connect deeply, look into each other's eyes and see that person, hear that person, appreciate that person. And reconnect with someone. Maybe you've only interacted online for a while, but my offer to you is to make one real life connection this week and to really give it the time that it deserves, to honor that real life connection, because it may take a bit more effort, but oh my goodness, it's worth it. So I'd love to hear from you. If you reach out and you make a real life connection this week, what does it mean to you? How does it feel to bring that back into your life? If it's maybe been a part of your life that's slipped a little bit over the last 5 years. And I'd love for you to share with me some real life moments and to be able to share some of those on future episodes of what your experiences have been. So I look forward to hearing from you and to sharing your real life connections with you in a way that inspires me and inspires other people as well to really focus on building that connection, not just for who we are today, but who we're becoming in the future as well. Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming Unapologetically Me. Make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts so you never miss an episode.